So this session is very much about wrapping up your thoughts and showcasing what further support is out there, either through ourselves at London Museum Development or from other funders and other programmes. Last session, what's happening today? As I said, relatively straightforward, objectives as normal, and it's about reflecting how to prioritise your actions and what further support. So we'll be discussing what we've done over the last 6 sessions, talking about some tips when approaching embedding your diversity plans, actions, talking through where you are now on your diversity journey and where you would like to be, and will those actions that you started to write down support you in order to achieve that. Better understand how diversity and inclusion are embedded within key objectives and programs for funders going forward, showcasing some of those funders for you. So as Elizabeth said, we've got some funders here today. So they'll be talking through their programs and grant programs, and then better understand the support that we have got available. So to kickstart us all off this morning, I'd like to talk about consolidating your thoughts, as it were. What I'm calling a sort of check-in point to help you. We've gone through a lot of content, as I've said. You're probably brimming with lots of ideas of where you could possibly go. Lots of ideas about building, lots of ideas about programs, collections, which is a double-edged sword. It can be great and be full of lots of ideas, but also the flip side of that is that it can be incredibly overwhelming. And where do you start first? So part of my role here today is to reassure you and also talk through some of the ways that we can start looking at making those actions strategic and which ones can be dealt with first to enable you to start that journey. Your diversity journey is going to be unique, but it is comparable to others. So we've looked at terminology, borough data, how to make your museum inclusive in terms of programs, collections, workforce, trustees, buildings, etc. However, when you take that back to your museums themselves, your museums are unique, whether it be in terms of content, objects, collections, your borough profile, who already is in your organisation, who you're working with, who your audiences are, how supportive your trustees are they leading by example? For example, do they have a diverse board? And how much you can actually physically change of your building to make it more accessible. So those are unique things for you guys individually. So therefore your approach has got to be, my favourite words, realistic for your organisation going forward. I'm a great advocate for the somewhat controversial opinion that museums cannot be everything to everyone. However, the big caveat to that is we can make a big difference if we plan it correctly, and it can be embedded going forward. And what I mean by that is time and time again, I see that museums have bucket loads of enthusiasm, willingness, a genuine desire within the organisation, members of staff, to want to be responsive to their community and make a real and genuine approach to thinking creatively and representing the groups in their areas. And I firmly believe, and how I've continued to support museums throughout time, as it were, is thinking through approachable and achievable actions, which are broken down into what might seem like small actions to start with, but those small actions do have a ripple effect. And I think if you've been listening to the case studies over the last 6 sessions, you'll be able to see how small changes can have bigger impacts than you perhaps thought were possible at the beginning, whether it's internally or externally. And and it does build up on your diversity journey. So every little thing does matter, and overall you will, although it might not seem like it at the time, when you look at the big picture, you will start to see the fact that your museum is becoming more inclusive. And I would say that I'm also a great fan or a great advocate for the fact that just because you've done one project for one group doesn't mean that that doesn't affect other groups within the protected characteristics. And what I see is that you might have done one project for one group. However, what you do, whether it's the learning or the things that are in the gallery that have been produced or what's gone online or the changes, will impact and influence other protected characteristic groups as well. So, as I said, your collections, you guys, your journey will be unique, but it doesn't mean that you are alone. And we can definitely draw comparisons and similarities, which I'm hoping we will showcase in the next 10 minutes. And what I really want to do is look at your position now and where you would like to go to. And will the action points that you have started to write down, will they help you take you on that journey? So I was really excited because I always talk about a diversity journey in this way, but I'm not the only one who talks about it, apparently. So when I was Googling for this session, I came across this really nice and very useful diversity journey roadmap. So I can't take claim for it, and I have put the information in the additional handouts, but rather than doing my own one, here it is for you. So it's called a diversity journey roadmap. And what I'd want to do is have a think about where you are now. And I want you to be really honest with yourselves. Most museums will be somewhere along the 1 to 4 stage, if you're honest with yourselves. That's key. If you're honest with yourselves, you're on stage 1 to 4. So at the moment, thinking about what you've learned from other organisations, what they're doing, thinking about your organisations yourselves, staff within it, volunteers, what you're doing to becoming more inclusive, not what you plan to do, but where you are now, what you've done so far. Are you in stage 1, for example, where your museums and your colleagues, your museum and your colleagues just don't get it? They don't see the benefit of diversity and inclusion and think that there's nothing wrong with their homogeneous approach to their plans and programme. It's absolutely fine to do the same thing for the same people time and time again. Internally, some staff volunteers will realise that this might mean that the organisation has a limited shelf life and reduces the chances of securing external funding. But there are museums in this stage. Are you perhaps in stage 2, where you might just be window dressing? It describes organisations that are supportive of diversity and inclusion, and they may spend some resources on awards and recognition to showcase that they are doing something. They might spend time on benchmarking exercises to show that there is a commitment there for benefits of the audience or funders, but they don't necessarily believe that you need to have it throughout the whole organisation. Doesn't necessarily mean for a diverse or inclusive workplace culture, and they're not necessarily interested in investing in a framework, so behind the scenes, not just front what you see, what the audiences see, but back of house that will ultimately lead them there. Or are you in stage 3, where your museum wants to start to fix it? So the museum will have identified the problem. There will be a lack of diversity in many areas of their work or some areas of their work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they think there's much to be gained from it in terms of embedding workforce and audiences to generally fix the problem. And what I mean by this is organisations tend to, what I would term, project manage the solution by giving responsibility to one person with a small allocated budget, not a lot of resources, or powers to embed any changes that will address the problem across the whole organisation. So it's very isolated. So one person will be taking on the responsibility to do one area of work, but again, hasn't got the power to spread that across the organisation. Or are you in stage 4, where your museum sees diversity as an opportunity? Museums in this stage will begin to understand that diversity and inclusion is a business prerogative, and it's not a nice project to do or an isolated problem. Museums will start approaching it in the same way, diversity in the same way as they would any business opportunity, by embedding it into the entire museum, from the forward plan to marketing to programs development, training and recruitment. It's embedded within the organisational fabric to drive forward real change. Staff and volunteers will feel encouraged to voice their different opinions and are generally engaged and motivated to contribute fully and authentically to the ethos of the organisation becoming more diverse and inclusive. And also, museums are wanting to and actively talking to their community to create new programs, exhibitions, activities that respond to their needs. This gives organisations, museums, almost a competitive edge and means that they are successful in advocating and securing funding from others to support them in their work forward. Now, that's obviously quite simplistic stages, but hopefully that gives you enough to have a think about where you guys are. So the question is, what stage are you guys in now? What stage is your museum now? And will your actions support you going forward to take you to the next stage? So I'm going to pass over to Wilson from RIBA, who's going to chat about their journey and their work so far. So thanks very much, Wilson.
Hi everyone, and thanks Rachel and Elizabeth for inviting me. I am Wilson. I am from the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, and I'll give you a quick info about the RIBA if you don't know about it. It's I'm going to just quote the mission statement here. The RIBA is a global professional membership body driving excellence in architecture. And I memorised that because it's quite handy. It's staff-wise, it's about 300 people, and I'm part of the cultural wing. So imagine the RIBA more like, I always imagine more like a council, really. If you ever work for a council, it's got lots of arms, lots of different people doing different jobs, and that's how it is at RIBA. It's a very great, interesting organisation. Also, it's quite complex as well. I work as part of the museum library section as a learning officer, and the reason why I'm here is because at the end of 2019 we got a grant to diversify our audiences, and we actually used that for an event on January of last year, so January 2020, and to diversify our audiences we used it for targeting blind and partially sighted people who we knew didn't really come to the building, and we wanted to create an event that was directly for them, and it was a day of events, a workshop led by partially sighted artists, which looked at our building, our collections and our exhibitions. So that was a great event. I'm going to talk a bit more about that, but also there's lots of things that happened before, during and after, behind the scenes at the RIBA itself, which is probably, I think, be more, even more interesting, because a bit more complex, and it's about embedding some of that EDR within the culture of the organisation. If I go back to the event, it was successful. We attracted a group of blind partially sighted people to use our collections, walk around the building and interact with our exhibition. So we knew our building, our offer was suitable for other audiences, and that's given us a lot of confidence. Of course, that was January 2020, and then stuff happened, so we couldn't quite build on it yet. But when our building reopens later this year, we hopefully will actually be able to carry on that work directly with the public. The RIBA works with the public, also works a lot with its own members who are architects, and also itself has got, as I said before, about 300 members of staff, so it's quite a large body. So there's three sort of groups of people that we really working with. I primarily work with the public, and the grant was very useful. Actually, it was essential in this case to diversify our audience for the public, and we hope to build on that and continue that in the next few months. In terms of actual internal, for the grants, we also had to show our equality action plan, and that's actually quite interesting because we realised actually we probably just didn't have it completed. We just had areas for improvement, and the grant actually highlighted that because I actually had to look for it, and we found it was had gaps, it's slightly out of date, and I sort of had to go around the organisation just trying to find any EDI policies that we had. It was incomplete, so that's why I had to start working with other parts of the organisation. It's a diverse organisation, so I had to reach out, ask various other teams, see what we had, and the most important one was actually HR. And so talking with the head of HR at the IBA, I realised it was quite a lot of work. I didn't do as much, he did most of this. And we actually then had to really look at what we were doing, our quality action plan, policies we had. And one of the things we realised is that quite diffused. And so that's why he set up a working group and made sure that there was senior buy-in. So it was just me or myself or just a few scattered individuals in the organisation. It was actually, we had in that working group, which first met in October 2019, and it met just before lockdown again, so we had a few meetings. We had a director chairing it from the start, so we had senior buy-in, and we opened it up to all staff, and it's interesting to see all corners of the RIBA voluntarily were wanting to get involved. The RIBA itself is an international organisation, but most of our staff are UK, but they're spread out throughout the regions as well. So we had lots of people from different regions, different teams like finance, HR, the public areas, the facilities. So everyone was present in that working group, and from that we set up a few actions, which included getting staff data. So internally, we had realised, head of HR realised when he was going through a lot of the information that we had incomplete staff data, and you can't action anything unless you really know the state of your organisation. And so that started off as one of the action points. Another was to create smaller networks for people with protected characteristics within the organisation, and also creating an advocates for EDI within the organisation. So that's what we had planned, and also events as well. So in the middle of lockdown, we did manage to get a staff survey, so we could see who our staff were, essentially, and not just guess. We did have data on members, because separately, architect members, we had collected that, but we hadn't collected it for our staff. So we had to, in effect, get our own house in order as well, before we asked for anything else. In the autumn, we also had a series of events, and that was about training. So one of the points that the working group had identified was the need for training about things like unconscious bias, but also to hear experiences of other members of staff and others from outside the organisation. And that was a very interesting series of events, and hopefully those will be annual, so they're embedded in. But further on, we also, during lockdown, beyond the working groups, we did have also an EDI consultant. So that's actually the big thing. So at the beginning, the big thing was getting senior buy-in, and that was before lockdown. And then after lockdown, well, I say during lockdown, a budget appeared. And I have to admit, the budget maybe was a bit more forthcoming because of events over the summer. But that's the key thing. I think senior buy-in and budget for us was quite important. And having that budget meant that we could have an EDI consultant and forthcoming in, I don't exactly know when, but in the next few months, we'll have a director of diversity and inclusion. That's quite a big journey from that grant, which we initially had used primarily to leverage a diversification in our public audience, set off a lot of the actions which were then taken up further on over the last year or so. So it's quite a complex and probably unplanned chain of events from what we had from the grant. I mean, obviously lots of other things fed into this, but the grant was very important. I think really to get everyone together, identify some of what we're lacking. So the grant itself didn't say employ the EDI consultant that came later on. It all had a place. So whatever you do, know that it could have a bigger impact, even if you think what you're doing is very small. It's really interesting looking at the steps that Rachel showed earlier. I think we might, I'm optimistically thinking we might be somewhere near the middle, maybe 4, 5. I'm not sure where everyone else is, but I'm trying to be optimistic here, and maybe we're going to be moving on, maybe in the next stages as we get a director of diversity and inclusion.
Thank you so much, Wilson. It's really exciting to hear your journey. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, so initially there was no, you didn't have to fill out a form or anything, you just said, I want to be part of this working group. So it's very open straight away. And that was open to everyone. So yeah, there weren't any barriers. We didn't say, oh, you can only have one person from this particular team, or you must have this, or you must be interested. We just said, we just opened up to anyone who was interested in joining. And so that, I think that's why so many people joined. I think because there were just, it seemed like there were like lots of pockets of interest throughout the organisation, but because it's such a big organisation, we never knew until the call out was made. That actually quite early on we had like a remit. So the first meeting we had was quite quite sprawling, but very early on by the second one, directed, we had like a remit of what we should cover and do. Yeah, early on we just said that everything said within that working group stayed. It wasn't going to be recorded or used again, so it was always internally. But I think also it's just I think one person I think speaks frankly. It did seem like other people opened up as well. You know, and then initially the first few minutes, like, everyone's very silent and polite. Once one person sort of opens up, everyone starts opening up as well. And so we frequently ran out of time because people were just saying so much stuff, and it was quite cathartic at times, about the different experiences of different groups. We have a very diverse workforce, and so we had a huge range of different experiences which were just being shared, and that sort of fed into a lot of the other events afterwards, where we had training sessions where people did talk about their experiences. So it was an interesting source.
Thank you so much, Wilson. That's brilliant. That's as a true testament to a ripple effect. So thank you. And I hope people felt reassured by that. I should say that the grant was for £1,000, just in case anybody had that question. So more money than some, but again, it's that ripple effect, unforeseen chain of events that can and does have impact. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you so much, Wilson. Taking from where we were, talking about stages, you've probably or started to talk about where you are on the journey. You started to talk about some of the actions that you want to do, but also as a flip side of that, some of you might have gone, oh, I'm not sure if some of these actions don't need changing a little bit, or I need some others, or this one won't work. So what I'd like to move on to for the next sort of 30 minutes before we have a break is around changing and prioritising points to embed inclusivity. So what I thought I'd start off with is just a couple of tips that I share with museums who are going through this process. When we're talking about action points, we're not talking about, from the template that I provided at the beginning, we're not necessarily talking about a full-on plan here. We're talking about the action points here. Foremost and importantly, and I cannot stress this enough, and I will repeat it for any one-to-one meetings that we have, is that action points have got to be relevant to your scale, your location, and practice to have the most lasting impact. They need to reflect your organisation's individual challenges as well as its resources, which is both staff time as well as budgets, both internally and externally, your purpose and your local context. The best action points are when they're responsive to local needs of the group, and they are, believe it or not, a two-way street or mutually beneficial between your audience and your museum. And what I mean by that is that you work with, not for or behalf of your groups, and that those action points, as a result of those conversations, can be adaptive and evolve based on those conversations. We might have ideas what groups might want to do and audiences might want to see at our organisation, and that can be as part of the action points. But based on those conversations that you have, is it fit for purpose? Does that respond to what your audiences actually want to do with you, and what audiences want to see from you? And if not, it's fine to change those. It's not set in stone. Another key point around action points is for organisations of your size, I would strongly recommend that they complement and are included in your forward plan, action plan, or audience development plan. But most of you probably won't have that, and that's fine. But what's key here is it's embedded within your plans as they are now. Doesn't stand as a standalone policy or standalone, because we all do it. We might write a plan and then we put it and we shelve it somewhere. So therefore it's about embedding it into your key plan, whether that be your forward plan, strategic plan, or if you're a slightly organisation within your audience development plan. The next thing that I need to talk about, or for you guys to think about, is when looking at those action points to make them better, is whether you'll be delivering them in the short, medium, or long term. And what I mean by that short term, we're talking, can they be delivered up to the next 12, 18 months? That would be what I would consider a short-term goal or a short-term action. Medium, we're sort of talking 18 months to 3 years. And then long term is either the life of the plan itself, or until you have a funding opportunity or something else happens to make that project possible. Most long-term actions will be looking at a building, for example, putting a lift in, as these are examples, not necessarily all true for your organization, but it's a big project. It will have lots of little things that happen as well, but it's a big scope that needs impetus. It needs some form of funding, whether that's internally or externally. And what tends to happen is that goes to the long-term plan, unless an opportunity or a funding avenue becomes available. And then you think about whether it's actually possible to deliver it sooner rather than later or as planned. So that's what I talk about: short, medium, and long term. Think about that in terms of your action points. What can you deliver in the short term? There may be some really easy, quick wins there. And I love a quick win. I think it's really important. It sets the precedent, it sets the process, it gets you talking to your staff, to your trustees, and you can start seeing how a small thing can have bigger changes. So is there a short win or short-term goals that you can achieve over the next 12 months that probably don't require a lot of funding, if any, at all? Another key part of your action points should be whether there are resources, so that's money, time, staff time, actual time, to support the actions where needed. So who's going to be responsible for doing it? Who are you responding to? Who are you telling of the actions to? Is it your director? Is it other members of staff? Is it your board of trustees? How are you telling them about progress? How are you telling them about how it's been done, or stuff is being carried out on it? And it's key there to talk through that information with your board of trustees and or equivalent. So I know for some organizations, they start to put that on their board meeting agendas, for example. So that's something to think about. Where is it that you can start to, and it's about making it responsibility of everybody. So everybody starts seeing, even if it's a short-term action, how that is starting to have a ripple effect. And also key within the action points is how you are going to share your learning and diversity journey with others. I put this in here now because what I generally find is that museums might be doing some great projects, but do we know about them? Do others know about them to learn from them? We spend so much time desperately trying to deliver everything that we don't often have time to showcase or advocate for what we do. And actually, if we started to do that just a little bit more, which of course does take time, will funders start to notice what you're doing as well. So there is, again, the ripple effect. Who's talking? If your trustees know about it, are they talking to other people about what you're doing to get that buy-in from others? So it is important to think about how you are sharing what your action points are and what you're achieving against them. So other key factors, so this is not necessarily to do with actions, but other things to flag when you're developing, revising, reprioritising. We've obviously talked about working with and not for or behalf of groups. If anybody's ever seen any grant criteria, you know it's from me, because I always underline that that's with and not on behalf of. So that is where my line sits, and it is an important line, important underlining words there, should I say. Part of that is to identify groups within your community that do not visit. But what's important here is that it's based on your own data and your borough data. Don't assume, and I know we've talked about this in session 2, don't assume you know who's not visiting and what groups make up your local area. Base it on what information you have available. It makes your applications, your funding applications stronger. It makes your case for support stronger internally. If you can say, this is why we're going to be working with this group. Another key thing is about talking to your staff, your volunteers, about which audiences to target. So you might have a long list of audiences that you want to work with, and start talking to them about the barriers of reasons that they might not be coming or participating in your events, your collections, etc. And is there a way, even before you've spoken to your groups, for you to overcome any potential obstacles? There may be not, but are you aware of those obstacles, so that when you start to talk to those groups, you can talk to them about those obstacles and ways collectively you can build on that and turn that obstacle into a positive and get them involved. Then it comes down to researching which in particular groups you want to work with and inviting them for a coffee or a virtual coffee these days, and hopefully not too distant future, an actual visit to your museum with some coffee and some cake. So it's about talking to them. Hopefully that's not far off, but it's about picking up the phone and being active, talking to them and starting that two-way process. And then based on those conversations, you might have 4 or 5 with different groups. Who is it within those groups that you really want to target? Think realistically and about your size here, about how many more new audiences and groups you can work with in the next 12 to 18 months. For most of your organizations, I'd probably say 1, 2 at the most, to really start to see that change. Otherwise, you'll be spread too thinly, etc. So who is it that you want to target? And be realistic about that. Another important factor here is not to do it on yourself, by yourself, on your own. I can't stress that one enough either. Encourage and utilize working in partnership with other organizations, groups, whether it be audience groups, your local authority, support, and the teams within that, other museums, networks, contacts, etc., to help you identify, learn lessons from, and build those relationships going forward. As part of that, look for inspiration and learning from other museums, and I hope that's what we've tried to showcase over the last 6 sessions as well, who've undertaken similar projects, action points, and discuss where you're at now and where you would like to be. Learn from. I love the museum sector in the fact that everybody is very, very happy to share this learning, utilize it. Discuss those actions continually with your team and discuss whether actions or plans need to change or evolve, and be honest about that, because they undoubtedly will. Stuff that you thought you could happen in the next 6 weeks, that's a very short timetable, 6 months, say something will have come along and it has not been possible. That is absolutely fine because things will have changed. However, what you need to think about is it realistic to then still deliver it within 6 months, or is it changing, or how do you need to change that action point to make it achievable within a time frame that you want to do? Do actions need to either speed up, as it were, or slow down due to funding opportunities, staff illness, staff changes? So always be prepared that those actions are likely to change and need to be prioritized and reprioritized, so that they can be achieved. Okay, and it doesn't matter if your short-term goals become your medium goals, or a long-term goal suddenly becomes a short-term goal. That's realistic, and it's showcasing that you are still on that journey. You're just reprioritizing. Use all your evidence and knowledge that you've collected to put in funding applications, and work with us at London Museum Development to support you with those funding applications. We can read applications, we can support applications, and we can feed back before you even put in those applications in, so that you can achieve what you want to and achieve those action points. And work with audiences that add significant value and address your developmental goals and gaps from the perspective of your programs, audience, community engagement, workforce, and governance. Okay, so working with, not behalf or before, no problem. So working with is that you're actually talking to your groups. You're listening, so actively listening to what they want to do. What we generally find is we're not sugarcoating it. And what I mean by sugarcoating it is that we've brought them in for a nice cup of coffee. We might have listened, we might have heard what they said, but we still go our own way. So we still want to tell our groups what they should be doing. We want to, what we're trying to change there is that listening into and actioning. So the action is based on those listening skills. You might have decided, for example, that you think the organization, you want to do an exhibition with this group, but based on the conversations, they might not want to write text labels. But what they might want to do is run an event for other audiences, or they might want to look at your objects and do something creative. They might want to write a poem about them. Those can still be changed into exhibition labels. But it's about listening to what that group wants to do, because let's face it, if you're not listening, they won't want to come back. They won't want to do another couple of weeks with you or do anything like that. So the key there, it's you're not making assumptions about what they want to do. And lots of people say we work with groups, but actually they don't necessarily mean that. But we're talking about, we're working for, what we're talking is changing it from for to with being the key. So prioritizing and adapting. Again, listening, empathy, advocacy. So what you're going to tackle first. It could be just a quick win, as I've mentioned, amongst all your actions, or it could already be something that you're working on. But talking about now, what is one of the actions that you can start doing within the next few weeks and start addressing? And I want you to think of it as whether it's realistic to achieve in the next 12 months. And discuss in pairs what support is available, knowledge is out there, and what you can utilize to get that action become reality. Turn it from a goal to achieved. And the aim is for the person who's talking about their action point to really start to think about, is it achievable? And what do I need to do to get that achieved?
Hello all, great to be here. My name is Mirka Kotulicpva and I work as Relationship Manager Museums within Visual Arts and Museums team in London, I should say for Arts Council England. And I'm going to be talking to you for about 8 to 10 minutes about our funding program called Project Grants, which I think really closely aligns with what you've been discussing in this training course. And it's very much about developing inclusive museum practice, or I think it's very suitable to sort of consider that option. I suppose I'm not going to be spending maybe too much time on our overall sort of organizational commitment to inclusivity, diversity and access, because I believe my colleague Colette was with you earlier and she would have covered the strategy and the investment principles. But obviously I'm just going to reiterate that's still true, and there is lots more resources and sort of conversations, excuse me, that's going to sort of happen in the summer of this year. We're going to have the delivery plan, hopefully in April of this year. So, you know, keep in touch and sort of participate as much as you can, because this is going to be essentially the big, a huge piece of work that is going to structuring everything we fund for the next 10 years. And that includes projects and organizations. We also have temporary equality objectives. I also wanted to sort of, for transparency, put it out there. This is also on our website. And essentially these inform our decision-making process at the moment. So particularly if you're thinking about submitting an application that engages underrepresented audiences that have faced historical exclusion or social injustice, and that means both audiences and workforce, we would be sort of strongly keen to support those. And then let's dive into project grants. I only have like a limited amount of time, so I wanted to sort of take you through to the fundamentals really. So project grants is an open access fund, which means anyone anyone essentially with a creative idea can apply. They can apply for an arts activity. That's the left-hand side of the slide. And that would include anything, such as visual arts, photography, I don't know, theater, music, literature, these kind of things. However, if you're an accredited museum, you can apply specifically for museum practice. That means an activity that develops your work as an accredited museum, something around your public programming, collections, outreach, learning programs, and so on. We have actually a dedicated info sheet on our website that can give you more information about that as well. Applicants can apply for grants of up to from 1,000 up to £100,000, and this is divided into two streams. So under 15K and over 15K. And I suppose if you're a first-time applicant, we generally advise to come in for under 15K. So you build up that sort of funding track record. Your activity can include events, R&D, tours, workshops, and development, and doesn't have to, but can use creative media, which I suppose, again, is very interesting, particularly now as we are all very digitally oriented in sort of post-COVID-19 recovery. And on the right-hand side, I just quickly wanted to stress again what it is that we're closely considering at the moment as the sector is sort of facing the recovery. So there are five priorities, I should say, or types of applications we are keen to fund. And I listed three because I think these are most important or relevant to museums. And these are organizational development, so both around financial organizational development, but also inclusivity and your sort of future sustainability. Activities that closely align with our equality objectives, I've mentioned that. And also we are keen to fund live activity in the short term. So something that you can sort of deliver with your audiences now rather than sort of speculatively in the future when everything goes back to normal. Maybe yes, maybe not. Anyway, so inclusive museum practice is essentially everything you've been talking about in this course, from co-curation to participatory projects, advisory panels, contemporary collecting. Would be very keen to see decolonization projects, because of course these are relevant to all kinds of museums, not just those with colonial collections, inclusive programming, reinterpretation, you name it. And as Rachel was talking about, this also means sort of self-reflection and considering what you do front of house and back of the house. And again, that all can be integrated into your inclusive project. And now let's have a quick look in the second half of my presentation as to what the application actually will require from you and how it is structured and what is good to consider. So there are four segments: quality, public engagement, finance, and management. Let's start with the first two. Quality is essentially where you tell us about the nature of your project, what sort of track record you have in delivering these kinds of projects. Maybe you've done something like that in the past, but maybe you didn't. Maybe you have these skills, and that's great. But if you don't, are you working with other collaborators and partners who are supplying those skills so that the quality of the experience for you and the collaborators is considered? Just like Rachel was saying, this is the space where you also talk about how you've designed the activity and whether you're working with communities or delivering, and hopefully not, some kind of a final product for them to consume. So this is the space to be open and collaborative and participatory. And also very, very important, there is a specific question that asks how the project will develop your organization. So while this is a short-term activity, we are exactly looking for that embeddedness that your training course is about. So how this will develop your organization in the longer term. What is the change that this project will help to sort of execute or carry out or engender in your activity? Moving on, public engagement is single-handedly the most important part of the application, as we are essentially redistributing national lottery money. So it's the money that comes from the public and goes out to the public. And particularly if you are thinking about underrepresented audiences or audiences that have, as I said, been historically excluded, you will have a chance to talk about how actually your project meaningfully engages with them specifically in a bespoke way here in the public engagement section. And I do talk about specificity because sometimes the temptation with inclusive projects is to say, oh, they are open and accessible to everyone. But just by you stating that, that doesn't necessarily make it true. You actually have to make steps in your communication plans, in your outreach plans to reach out and work with these audiences. So that's what we look for as well in terms of your plans, how to reach audiences. Final point, because I'm trying to be super quick, we are considering the COVID-19 context, and so you will too. We are not looking for some large-scale public engagement. If it's going to be small groups, phased activity or digital activity, that's perfectly fine. Just, talk about that in your application. Finance and management, they may seem sort of more practical elements, but again, do consider how you are demonstrating and evidencing that consideration of inclusivity and representation and equality in finance and management also. So for example, does your budget really reflect that you are dedicating resources to the activity with your participants? Sometimes it's relevant to consider their travel costs. Sometimes there will be access provision, particularly if you're, I don't know, putting out audiovisual materials. It's good to consider, it's essential to consider subtitles or transcriptions to put out on your website. Other times, again, depending on the nature of the project, it might be necessary to consider how you're working with the participants, whether there is some kind of fee or a reward, or I don't know, particularly if they are working on your research. Sometimes community research can take a longer time. So how is it that you're actually valuing the labor that these participants are bringing to the project? What I'm trying to say, do not structure it as an exploitative project where you just outsource, the knowledge production to them. Finally, management. This is about plans to deliver the activity safely and to a high standard. I would just highlight, do introduce the list of partners and consider again how inclusive that list is and how well they support your activity. Sometimes we see a disconnect between what an applicant wants to do and who they actually partner up to deliver it with. And evaluation, totally, I can see, yes, finishing. And evaluation is really the key element here. Please do tell us what you will be taking from that activity, how you will be sort of reflecting on what's been achieved. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm happy to circulate the slides, just a couple of useful resources, but everything's online as well. We have advice and guidance on the website, and also that particular museum's info sheet that I mentioned. Museum development are here. We are here. If you want to talk to us, please do. And also just so that there is access provision for applicants who might have access support needs also in terms of interaction with the Arts Council and submitting an application. So do get in touch with customer services if you have access needs.
Thank you so much, Mirka. Does anybody have any questions?
No, well, the thing is, the fund doesn't cover normal overheads. So the business running costs, no. But if you are exactly recruiting someone, or there is a project manager, a freelancer that is working on a project and supporting the delivery of the project, absolutely. So these kind of costs would, yeah, great.
So just to clarify, so you full cost recovery you wouldn't be able to do for the
Sorry.
Full cost recovery. So a portion of the office space that the new person you recruit would use, and the IT and all that kind of, and a portion of light that they'd be using and bills, could you use, are you allowed to
exactly, all the costs that relate specifically to the delivery of the project are fine. So if, I don't know, you will have higher telephone bills, I don't know, I'm just shooting into the dark now, or there is a member of staff that normally works for you, but of course will now be spending more time delivering the project, those additional costs we can cover, but we can't cover the regular, museum staff cost. Yeah. What I would say is that, first of all, you need to structure the activity the way it suits you. And that's why I sort of pointed out the organizational development. You can totally just apply specifically for that and talk to us, whatever the training or resources, and I don't know, working with consultants or setting up particular posts that you need in order to deliver better to your audiences and serve your community in a more inclusive way in the future. But also what happens is applicants sometimes structure or sort of come up with a creative project and tag on that organizational development to it, which also makes sense. As you are sort of testing and trialing something, learning will come out of it, and then you will be able to also maybe this may lead to a policy or a change of other structural, bits and pieces within your institution. So really, there are multiple routes here.
So hello everybody, I'm Margaret. I am the Programmes Manager for AIM, the Association of Independent Museums. I did a quick check down the delegate list earlier, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of you are members of AIM, and those that aren't, although there is no, you don't have to be an independent museum to join AIM. We are open to anybody. Do check us out. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about our Tackling Inequalities new hallmark and the grant programme associated with that. And I also thought I'd just give you a little bit of a wider overview of what AIM is doing as ourselves as an organisation within this area as well. So I hope you've all come across the AIM Hallmarks of Prospering Museums, which were launched in 2015. Now it covered 9 sort of key areas where we feel that, you know, are important for museums to be prospering and sustainable. It is all on our website. And when we launched the Tackling Inequality hallmark in autumn last year, so it's a completely new one for us. So there's the overall heading for it, that the organisation is inclusive and challenges prejudice, discrimination and racism. And there, I won't read all of this out to you, but the whole point of the hallmarks is that they are very high level, and so there's not huge amounts of reading to do with it. So there's a sort of slightly longer definition and then some prompt questions. Go onto our website, and I would say go onto our website and have a look at it. But what we've tried to do is that recognise that inequalities are complex and a convergence of things, and that museums have a role to play both in their organisational culture and through the stories and their collections and what they tell us about our heritage and our history. So the this is quite a new area of work for AIM, and I think we had led initiatives before around developing audiences and understanding audiences, and a piece of work called Open Up, but we completely recognised ourselves that this hadn't had the impact that it should have done, and that we needed to do something different to engage with this, both internally within our own organisation and to challenge and support our members. So we really wanted to not just be seen to be saying the right thing, but to have a programme that backed it up as well. So one of the things that we decided to do was to focus our hallmarks grants this year on projects that support the Tackling Inequality hallmark. So this is just the overview of it. We want to support organisations that contribute to positive change by committing to identifying, taking steps to address inequalities. So we will support projects that are about organisational change and about using and developing their collections. The closing date for the hallmarks grants is the 31st of January, so it's this Sunday. So you have a very, very, very small window of opportunity if you are interested. Our hallmarks grants come from our Arts Council MPO funding, so they are for accredited museums, and it's not a huge pot of money. We have £60,000, and we are offering grants of up to £10,000. So we will only be funding, depends what people ask for, but we can only, we can't fund a lot of projects with it. I would say at the moment I have had inquiries about it, around maybe about 10 to 15 organisations. I don't think we've actually had any applications yet, but that's not unusual. They tend to come in at the last minute. So if you are interested, do please still consider it. Our application process isn't complicated. There is an application form on the website. there's some links to that there, so you can, I'm sure you can find it, but you're very welcome to share the slides afterwards. Just as a bit of background into what else is happening within AIM, and do tell me when I need to be quiet. This was in response to the George Floyd killing and the events that happened over the summer, and that we were asked by RIBA, the Black Cultural Archives, to sign up to a sector statement, which we did, and we felt that we needed to make sure that we were actually acting on this and not just making a statement about it. So we have developed our own internal action plan about informing AIM's, making sure that we are inclusive as an organisation, and that what we ask our members to do, we do ourselves as well. So we have just been through a programme of doing new board recruitment to wider reflect diversity and the wider range of our membership. We developed the new hallmark with the hallmark grants, and we are intending to commission internal audit ourselves of our work and review our grant panels and contractors, and look at having a value statement that we would ask AIM members to sign up to. We don't just want to challenge our members, we try to give practical support as well. So we've been running some online workshops with Culture and Errol Francis, and I'm very happy to have conversations with anybody that want to put in a grant application, and we'll have our fingers crossed for further programs in the future that will not just, that we like to try and give people support and resources, as well as as well as point people in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And yeah, does anybody have any questions for Margaret?
Okay, so the hallmarks are yearly, so it is only open now and again next year, and I don't know, I can't say now whether we will focus it in the same way next year. So if you have a project in mind, really now is the opportunity to go for it.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Emma Edgell from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. I am fairly new to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. I've been here about 4 months, so I'm part of the London and South team. My main role is for London. I've been focused very much on our areas of focus in Brent, Enfield and Newham so far, but I'm hoping to spread that out as our programme opens, so I get to know a bit more of London. So it's really good to have an opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to talk about our approach to inclusion and how in particular we're doing a review into equalities, diversity and inclusion, and then I'll obviously come on to a bit about our funding and how that can help you with your own inclusion work. So back in June, our chief exec, I guess on the back of world events, was talking about whether we are really doing enough to widen the range of people involved in heritage, and so set up a task force. And the vision of that was to base it around the Equality Act to start with, but to not do what's easiest, just to really go at a pace where we can take in good evidence and strategically think about how we can really achieve our ambitions for equality and diversity. A particular note was made about intersectionality on this and making sure we don't pigeonhole specific groups or communities, and understand how different elements of inclusion can have an impact. So the review has 4 streams, as you can see in the diagram. Culture, we were doing quite a bit on this anyway, because to do with how we'd slightly restructured, so there was quite a bit of cultural work going on anyway. Governance, as the previous speaker said, looking at our own governance, we're a little bit limited because we are an arm's length body from DCMS, so we have to follow some of their recruitment policies for our board and committee members, but we are looking at how we can diversify the pool of applicants when we recruit some roles, particularly the London committee will be coming up later this year. In terms of workforce, there's a few things going on. We're actually in partnership with the Windsor Fellowship, so we've got some new employees starting, in fact some start next week, and they come from a much broader range of backgrounds than perhaps we normally get into the fund. So it's a specific way of getting different voices inside the fund, and we're making sure there's training for a much wider range of subjects, such as supporting people who are transitioning or with the menopause and things like that. So just trying to look at it on all its different facets. Investment's probably where most significant change that's apparent to the outside world. And the key thing to say on this is it's not new. We put in our strategic funding framework back in 2019, and we from that point have a mandatory inclusion outcome. So we want projects that specifically target and involve communities that are traditionally underrepresented in heritage. So we're talking about well-known groups, people in the 11 to 25 age bracket, disabled people, people with Black, African and minority ethnic backgrounds, people on low incomes, and a few other groups too. So all projects have to have some form of inclusion element. So we're seeing things like a memory cafe going into a museum. We're looking at autism friendly trails, right through to making sure traditional sort of building capital projects are very much keeping people involved, and also looking at particular communities and telling the stories that are less well known. The future work of the review, because it's continuing, is about surveying the skills of our consultants. We have a list of support service consultants, and we need to just check what their knowledge and expertise is to do with inclusion, so we can help any applicants by providing that support to them through that register of consultants. We're also looking at different funding models, whether micro grants, early year support, or solicited bids, and we've started to use some of those already. And looking at the applicant's journey, we really want to make sure we're funding the right things and in the right way too. So we see inclusion as being how we're treating our applicants right through to the projects that are being delivered. Some of the specific things are supporting applicants, making a priority for those groups that are maybe our first time applicants to the Heritage Fund, or who are particularly working with or designing projects for underrepresented groups. And we've identified 13 areas in the UK for focus, because these have previously had poor levels of spend and also see significant levels of deprivation. So there's 13 of those. The ones for London and South, as I say, are the 3 London boroughs of Brent, Enfield and Newham. So I think it's important to say that we see this work as being across, whether people are visitors, participants, trustees, or the workforces of the organisations we support. So we look across the spectrum. There's lots of things you can do, and much of these I'm sure you've been covering on your course, but we're all about removing those barriers, helping to meet the needs of people, encouraging people to tell their stories. And to do that, you'll use a variety of tools. You might use training of your staff, you might need to adjust physical elements of your museum or its interpretation, or you might want to run specific sessions or work in partnership with a particular group. So a couple of case studies. This Fashioning Africa was a really important project down in Brighton and Hove. It's quite a significant investment from the Heritage Fund too. And whilst that museum holds a really well-known collection of world art, most of the African objects had a colonial bias. So the museum set out to rectify that situation, and they established a collecting panel using a BME network that existed already in Brighton and Hove, and a set of academics as well, to help inform those decisions and have a new collecting policy. And it culminated in a Fashion Cities Africa exhibition in the first instance, but obviously those items are also within the collection for the longer term. A much smaller example was down in Margate, at Margate Museum. Despite well-known links between Turner and Margate, this exhibition actually sprung from a very small number of artefacts. And the interesting bit in this context is their involvement in different groups. So in Margate, there are some 3,000 Roma people who've left their home countries, often in Eastern Europe, in search for a better life, but they're often facing significant barriers due to their language and different cultural issues that arise. So they wanted to make sure they really helped that community to access this exhibition, and they ran particular tours for those groups and also did sign language tours for the deaf community. So it was about quality, so really identifying a couple of specific audiences and then working with them to ensure this was really, really accessible for them, as opposed to trying to do a sort of one-size-fits-all approach. And finally, this one was all about preserving the intangible cultural heritage of Kim Jam through sharing the preparation of kimchi. So this was around Kingston Museum. So you can see that they got the recipes from those first immigrants and then shared them, preserved them, and then sort of developed that heritage by getting the whole community involved in making kimchi. So moving on now to the funding that we have available, it's very much in response to our recognition of responding to COVID, but also keeping in mind these underrepresented communities. So the first bit that's open now and has been open since November is about resilience and inclusion. Just to say, there's specific criteria and it's quite competitive. So if you've got a project ready that isn't very risky, but really addresses these criteria, then put in an application. If not, please wait. And the reason for waiting is that in just a fortnight's time, we'll be opening our more wider programme. It's not a return to business as usual. The outcomes we want and set out in our strategic funding framework remain, and inclusion is very much at the heart of that. But we are placing an emphasis on some things to do with the response and recovery to COVID. So in terms of inclusion, that will still be mandatory, and we'll be looking at the sort of size of the grant and also the distance travelled for an organisation as about whether that would meet our requirements. And then there's 6 priority outcomes to do with skills and jobs, resilience, making places a better place to live, things like that. All projects will need to address the requirements for environmental sustainability too. And we'll follow our normal process of having small, medium and large grants for those of you familiar with the fund structures. So here's just a few tips, making sure you're thinking about heritage, thinking about COVID, so we can see that you've got a plan, a game plan as much as we can in these uncertain times. Thinking about the community you want to work with. Is this a project that they want to do? Making sure you're not doing it to them, but with them, and getting in the best position you can with the project, and then submitting a project inquiry form to us if you've got an idea, and then we can give you some advice. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Emma. The next presenter is actually a pre-recorded, and it is Holly from the Paul Hamlyn Foundation.
Hi there, my name is Holly Donagh and I'm the Director of Strategic Learning, Insight and Influence at the Paul Hamlyn Foundation. I'm really sorry I can't be with you this afternoon. I hope you have a great session. I've been asked to talk a little bit about our work in diversity, equity and inclusion, and I'm really happy to do that, and I hope it's useful for you. You'll, I'm sure, know how to find the Paul Hamlyn Foundation website. There's an awful lot of information on there about some of the things I'm going to talk about, so I won't repeat that, but you know, that's a resource for people to go to. And maybe I'll just start by saying a little bit about our arts access and participation funding. So we opened sort of, if you like, normal grant making in October last year, and we have made some changes. Through the COVID pandemic to this point, we've been doing emergency funding alongside, in inverted commas, normal funding. So that's kind of what that means. One of our aspirations now for the funds is that they are more open, and people can come to us with great ideas and we can talk about fit. So there is less specific sort of prioritization, as it were. But the real ambition in terms of that funding is to reach out to communities and to different parts of the country and different organizations and different people, to think about how they can engage with the arts and what does engagement and participation mean for them. So we're really interested in funding some you know, perhaps new approaches to partnership, collaboration, engagement that think about how we not only work with communities, but how we might actually shift power, give agency, and have a different kind of relationship with communities. So do have a look at that funding. It's really interesting. One of the things that we've done as well is to actually prioritise discussions with organisations that are led by people who might experience racism, so Black people or Asian people or people from different ethnic groups, or people who might experience ableism, so people with disabilities, and to actually have those conversations first so that we're trying to make sure that we're open and responding to organisations that might not have come to us for funding in the past. We know that's not enough, and we're thinking quite hard about outreach and, you know, how we speak to different groups, how we're welcoming to different groups that perhaps haven't come to us before, but also what the sort of journey of funding requirements are, because some organisations might, you know, they might not be at a stage where they could compete against larger organisations or different organisations that have been funded before in terms of our funding, the sort of competitiveness of the funding. So all of those things are really kind of live discussions within the foundation at the moment. In terms of our diversity, equity and inclusion work, you'll also see a lot more information on that on our website. There's a statement of commitment, there's a description of some of the things that we're doing. There's the first plan that we've published. And I guess what I would say is, you know, I've only been at the foundation since June last year, and this is a journey that started way before my time. But we still, you know, don't feel like we have all the answers, and we're still very much in kind of listening mode and thinking about what we can do, whilst being really aware that it's not good enough to sort of stay in the thinking stage for too long. You have to also be taking action. We're quite focused, I guess, at the moment on how we support staff and what the kind of levels of learning are for staff. Conversations about diversity, equity and inclusion, you know, can be uncomfortable for staff and externally, obviously. And we're kind of quite keen to sort of embrace the discomfort in some ways if those conversations aren't uncomfortable. I think our sense is that perhaps they're not going far enough. We're thinking about what this means for our grant making, obviously, and thinking about our strategy. We had a strategy that came out in September, and that's really built around the principles of social justice and thinking about how funding in the arts, in the youth space, in the migration space, really speaks to that bigger agenda around social justice. I think, like many organisations, you know, we were sort of shocked by the murder of George Floyd in the summer, and also thoughtful about, you know, how that was a kind of held a mirror up to organisations and to a challenge in some ways to say, are you doing enough? Are you going far enough? And I hope we're responding to that challenge and being as thoughtful as we can about our role in, you know, shaping a better future in that context. You'll see on the website our DEI plan. We've used the Association for Charitable Foundations pillars as a sort of methodology for the planning, which we found really, really useful. And I certainly would recommend that to all organisations because it helps you look at the different layers at which you can think about DEI. And, you know, we're motoring on some areas, and some areas, I guess, are going slower. Trying to think about, you know, maybe what's helpful to you from this process. I think thinking really carefully about how you support colleagues who do experience racism or colleagues who experience ableism within your organisations. They're obviously crucial to the conversation, but it can be a real burden on those colleagues if they're constantly asked to kind of contribute to that sort of strategy work. And we're just quite thoughtful about how we get that right. I think that's something to consider. We've set up a staff network, and I think that's been successful. And I would certainly think encourage organisations to think about those kind of mechanisms. We're working with some outside organisations. I think we felt that as an organisation with trustees and a board, and obviously a large organisation with internal hierarchy, bringing in some external support feels useful as a way of creating some objectivity and enabling different people within the organisation to have one conversation. So we'll see how that goes, but equally we're keen that doesn't mean that we're handing the work to somebody else. It's really important that we own the thinking and that we do the work as an organisation. So I think that's something quite careful to think about. Certainly, for us, it's important to be thinking internally about the culture change and those kind of questions. But, we're a grant making organisation. We need to be getting money out to the right people. And, we're probably advanced in terms of our DEI in some of the areas where we work, like migration and youth space and things like that. And maybe we need to advance further in others. So I think that question about pace is something really to consider. How can you go at pace, but do the right pace? And I think that requires quite careful thought, really. That's probably as much as I can say for now. I hope that's useful to you, and I hope you have a really good session going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel for the last 15 minutes of the whole series.
Thank you very much. I hope you found those presentations useful. The only other one I wanted to quickly flag, who wasn't able to come today, was the Art Fund, who offer small project grants of up to £10,000. And they will be launching that round later this year again. And it's to help museums act on good ideas and test new ways of working that will benefit their audiences. They're particularly interested in projects that support one of these 4 areas: reaching audiences, making connections, shaping futures, and building collections. And within all of that, in particular, they're looking to fund applications around audience development, equality, diversity, and inclusion, and new partnerships. So again, everything that we have been talking about today and throughout the series. So that is another potential funder to have a look at as well. So what happens next? Essentially, over the next sort of 10 minutes with some question time as well, I just want to reiterate some of the things that London Museum Development and myself can do to support you with what happens next. One of the first things that you might feel like you need to do following this particular session is to review and assess your planned actions. That could be in terms of timescale, budget, resources, but also in your conversations with your wider team, your audiences, etc. And also thinking about whether your action points are short, medium, or long term.